Hey guys, I love seeing all you beautiful people. Okay, well, I want to just start it off by saying I'm Chris, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm so glad to be facilitating this roundtable today. So if you guys don't mind just probably starting with Stacey, and just telling me your names and pronouns and just little bit about you.
Cool. My name is Stacey Harkey. My pronouns are he, him. I am gay. I live in Utah. I, in fact, was part of a sketch comedy show called Studio C. And my friends and I left and we started a media company. And I just kind of stay involved here. I like being involved with my communities. I teach at fitness at a couple rec centers. I do different like DEI and LGBTQ plus trainings for different corporations in the area. And I really want to make Utah a better place. That's like kind of my thing.
I'm Mimi. My pronouns are she, her, and I moved to Utah a month ago to work at a counseling practice for my internship, finishing up my master's degree. I specialize in OCD and eating disorders, and I work with a lot of faith transitions, and so I am really excited to be here.
I'm Jeannie. My pronouns are she, her. I go to college here in Utah. I identify as bisexual. I'm a psych major, and my goal is to eventually get to the point where I can do subsidized therapy for LGBTQ plus youth. But then eventually, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I want to develop a program that trains ecclesiastical leaders on how to better interact with LGBTQ plus members of the faith so we can like increase happiness and mental well-being within the church. So, yeah.
That is needed.
That is so awesome. So, just to kind of kick off the conversation, I want to just mention that this is going to come out towards the end of February, so towards the end of Black History Month. But we're Black all year round, so what the heck? So, I kind of wanted to start it off by just a general question of like, who do you guys see as like your biggest role model when it comes to Black history? Like, who do you really honor? Who do you really look up to? Who do you see yourself in?
It's a good question. there's like different ways I think I look at that question where it's like I look at it sometimes from there's like who is around nowadays. Like I love Key and Peele and I'm so excited for not only as a sketch comedian, the ground they've made as, sketch comedy, but also what they continue to do after. And I look at that and I like love that. I am obsessed with Michelle Obama and Barack, but Michelle Obama, you know? And that's like when I think of like people currently who are inspiring me, I think of like people within my field or people that are just like, just doing it.
Mimi, who would you consider to be your hero for Black history, or who you look up to?
That's a hard one because you could go so many different directions. Like, you could go the like, I don't know, Ruby Bridges type route or like someone more
Mm.
modern. I think that probably my cousin actually, she is the director of public health in St. Louis for the city. And she's always on like CNN and Oprah and all this stuff. And she's a doctor and she's just like killing the game and so inspirational. I really love how she like does a lot of different hairstyles and prints on camera that a lot of people kind of are just like, oh, like just be neutral. So she's pretty amazing.
What's her name?
Her name is Mati Davis. She's so into COVID and research and HIV and AIDS and stuff. It's amazing.
I'm looking her up now. Y'all don't have to wait.
Yeah, so I thought about this question and I was a little bit embarrassed because I was like, I don't know what to say. Like, should I say like Marsha P. Johnson or like something like that? But then I thought about it and like I didn't really grow up with like Marsha P. Johnson or anything, and this is really embarrassing, but it's actually Stacey Harkey. Like
Me?
he's my
Me?
hero. Yeah, you are. Well, because like
Is this a
you're like
prank? Is this a prank?
No, I'm dead serious. So like I always wanted to go to BYU since I was like 14 years old. And then but there weren't people that looked like me there, and I saw you on Studio C and I'm like, he's like the only black guy there and he's killing it and he's like everybody's favorite. And I was like, black people can be at BYU too. And then I didn't even know Stacey was gay until later. I found out I was bi. And I was struggling with that, and so then my cousin sends me this podcast, and Stacey, it's an episode Stacey's on, and in it, like, he talks about how, you talked about how, you're perfect and you shouldn't, like, pray to be fixed because, you're made to be the way that you are. So Stacey's, like, slick my hero, so, yeah.
Oh, Jeannie. That's like, okay, let me clarify. It's not like I'm perfect. But, yeah, it's like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeannie, because you probably remember better than I do, but, like, that's, like, my platform where it's, like, especially coming from, like, a religious background, I coming to terms with my sexuality meant acknowledging that I was made exactly how an all-powerful creator wanted me to be, right? And so by fighting my nature, I was essentially like fighting that creator. And so the best way to honor that creator is to be my authentic self and not to try to be anyone else. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Exactly, that was perfect. I heard that. I was literally like laying in my room on my bed looking up the ceiling and I was like, this man's spitting straight fire. Okay. So yeah, it's my guy. Stacey Harkey has changed my life, guys, and now I'm on glow up.
You know what's helped with that though? To be honest, a lot of like the way I feel about being gay has been really informed by how I feel about being black, like TBH.
Oh
It's
my
like
gosh,
the fact that like, go ahead.
I saw your Instagram post on intersectionality. It was amazing.
Yeah, I talk about that a little bit where it's like, I feel like there are a lot of, because intersectionality, right, is the concept that like the struggles and and at the purest form, Kimberly Crenshaw talked about it as like your struggles are like kind of a mass and create, according to your identities, a higher sense of oppression. And we kind of use intersectionality nowadays where it's like you're intersecting identities, like all the identities you hold, be it where you're from, your race, your culture, your geographic location, your religion. All this stuff informs how we experience the world and can essentially gives us different experiences. But when it comes to being black, like that is something where my parents had to work to let me know that like even though the world's going to feel a different way about you or treat you a different way, like you are perfect how you are. This is exactly how you're meant to exist, and you don't run from that. You embrace it. And so coming to terms with my sexuality and coming to terms with the fact that it was something that I didn't choose, but just like a natural part of me was like, I was able to take that lesson and be like, yo, same game,
Oh my gosh, yes. You're amazing. Thank you for being here.
Stop! No, you're amazing.
Oh, thanks.
I wasn't ready.
But that is such a beautiful insight, too, about how we also inspire each other, even in current days. I would say my heroes for Black history, even making current history, would be Marsha P. Johnson, because she is a baddie, and she not only represented the queer community, but also the colored community and the trans community. She killed 3 birds with 1 stone. So I love her. I love her so much. And then I also recently becoming obsessed with Lizzo.
Cha.
Because Lizzo represents a lot of like what it means to love yourself and be a person of color. Or at least that's kind of what I take away from her, at least. Because the way that she presents herself is with 100% confidence. And that's something that I can very much appreciate. And I just look up to her so much for that.
Dude, talk about intersectionality. When it comes to being Black in America, it's like our bodies are different. You know what I mean? Like we have a range of bodies and we have a culture that like hyper focuses on what it means to be attractive and how that's like you're like stick thin. I mean, this is like Mimi's range. I'm sure Mimi could go off. I want to hear you talk about this, Mimi. Tell me what you think.
Oh my gosh, there's so much fat phobia and weight stigma, and it's such an intersecting identity. A lot of people view health as a moral obligation or something that you can control because you're disciplined or willpowered. Lizzo's body is not meant to be a certain way because we have a human diversity of bodies that's just different. And I mean, the BMI is just stupid.
Oh, so dumb.
And It was never meant to measure health in general the way it was created. And so there's a lot of problems with the way that we don't give respect to people in larger bodies. We shame people. We have a whole epidemic against people's bodies. And not everyone wants to change their body, and not everyone should have to try and change their body to be considered attractive, because that's like just so painful, and so harmful for people's health in general too, because the dieting and the restriction and all that leads to a lot of disordered cognitions and like intentional weight loss. We know it just doesn't work long term because our bodies are protecting us to maintain the weight that we are engaging in life. We're moving our bodies, we're eating, and engaging in life. So I'll keep it there, but
Yes, I'm with you. I'm a personal trainer and then I teach fitness classes. And I am like really big on the platform of separating weight loss from fitness. Like they're different. They're different. You know what I mean? And when generally people come in to fitness with they want to accomplish something, but it's like, I always tell people, and this goes for, I think, whatever you're doing, like, what are you trying to accomplish? And then sometimes people will be like, I want to lose weight. And I'm like, why? Like, let's dig a little deeper. And I think this is important, especially for the Black community, because our bodies are different.
yeah,
Like they're built different. And so if you have the idea that like you want to look like this, it's like, listen, your bodies are different and you have different strengths and different weaknesses, and you're not meant to look like other people. It's not what your body's meant to do. And it will fight you if you
yes.
try to. Yeah.
It will, and it's interesting. There's this really great book called "Fearing the Black Body" by Sabrina Strings. She's a sociologist, and she talks about how before fat or weight was linked to health, it was trying to separate people based on like who are the savages. So like the European people can be like the thin ones, and so it's really rooted in racism, in trying to differentiate people based on size. And then they went on and added research and were like, I mean, poor research, but they were like, oh, like, look, it's for your health. And then it just all kind of keeps going today.
When I came out, I was like really nervous coming out because I've always been a thicker person. And unfortunately, I wasn't as in love with my body as I am now. But like, I'm like, all the curves, like, bring it on. But when I came out, I was really, all of a sudden for the first time, I was like thinking of my body in a different way. Like traditionally it was like, I have this body and no one's gonna like be attracted to it and it's not that big of a deal. But all of a sudden I'm coming out and I'm like thinking of dating and I'm like, oh snaps, my body. And so that was like that was really important for me to have this, like, to start thinking about being attractive and what does that mean? And all of a sudden experiencing all these pressures of like being this way and looking this way and fighting this way. And I wish I could just give people this lesson of just like, bodies are meant to change. You go through like cycles, you gain, you lose, it's okay. I think of the body like the earth. It's like the earth has like seasons and your body does too. And that's very okay and natural. And like at the end of the day, dating sometimes, I say this, it's like less about becoming what other people want and more about finding the person who vibes with what you got going on.
For sure. And I think this is such an interesting topic because being a marginalized group in America, that we experience being around people with all different body types, I experienced very young that like I had a different body type than the white kids around me. So it was very much of like, am I different for a reason? I don't feel like I should be like this. And to add on to that, I went into my career now, which is basically dance. And I do ballroom dance. And that has such a stereotypical image to it, where it's like you can only be successful in dance if you are a thin, tall, white male. Because that's the look that they always go for. But me being who I am, a person of color, 5'6", and a little bit more curved, it's harder to like be placed in like finals for competitions and everything like that. But I'm just trying to break that stigma now, because now I teach dance. I assistant coach down at the Lehigh High School right now. So it's always just trying to break down those barriers of like the stereotypes that are built around what it means to be like a healthy person in America, I feel like, and then also like what that looks like for people of color.
You described
Yeah.
me. You said
Yeah,
five,
I think
six, thick, and all the right things.
I always like to think about it more recently as like if you think of the most privileged person who's cisgender, who's straight, who has a thin white body, right? If you can't fit into one of those areas, like if you are like I don't know, black, for example. Wow, that's really relevant. But if you're like if you can't change your skin color, right? So like what can you change to be closer to that privileged identity? And so you can try and change your body. And so you're like, okay, I'm a little bit closer, I'm a little bit, more privileged than other people. And I think that's why kind of sometimes we talk about how like not that one privilege overtakes an oppressed identity, but sometimes it gives you certain different like layers. Like if I'm a little bit more privileged in this area, then like maybe I can have more access than I would with just having all the marginalized identities.
Interesting. How does that how does that relate as far as like being like queer and black? Does that happen? Do you see that? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it looks like suppressing your sexuality, trying to be like, well, if I'm black, that's already like a big, huge burden in this country. So I might as well just pretend to be like as straight cis as possible, right? Or um, yeah, I think that's really how it shows up and trying to make sure you look as much as that picture as you can, right? So with socioeconomic status, sometimes people will say like, oh, like that black person is like amazing because they're rich and they're living a great life and they're thin and like so it's almost like it's okay that they're black a little bit more because they're like rich and thin,
Mm,
right? But that kind of just makes the problem worse because people with more marginalized identities who aren't fitting into those stereotypes who don't have access to move up in those areas, then it makes it really hard.
interesting. I feel like Jeannie, is that something like, I mean, at BYU, you are like steeped in the core of like Utah, I feel like. What's that like there?
Oh, definitely. Especially like being female, black, and queer, and also coming from like a lower class socioeconomically. Like,
Mm.
I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of times it feels like you're just getting like all of these disadvantages heaped up on you. And so I truly like hated it for a very long time, especially because not even just in Utah, but like the culture of the church itself is very white in America. And even I'm from Georgia, and so like everybody there was white. And so I didn't see another black member there, and so I was like, "Oh, to be a good member, I must have to be white. So there's something wrong with me
Mm.
because I am black." And so I hated that, and I tried to, like you said, suppress my sexuality so I could be one step closer to that ideal church member. But it was coming to Utah, and like the Black Student Union been amazing. It was coming to Utah and seeing that there were like other people who were members of the church that looked like me. I was like, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe I can be good and be me. So I think it's about maybe getting that idealized version of like a Latter-day Saint or whatever it is you want to be out of your head and just focusing on embodying those ideals yourself. I think that's just the really important thing.
Yes, that's important of like representation, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like if you would have had the chance to have, and that's why when we talk about marginalized communities, talk about representation. I think a lot of people are like, "Why do you want to see yourself on a billboard? Like it's just a billboard," and it's like something you don't have to deal with, right? It's like intersectionality. It's like you can't have my experiences because you don't have my identities. But if
Exactly.
like if we could have had representation for little Jeannie growing up, it's like hopefully she wouldn't have had to like struggle so much with these things. Or even at
Exactly.
BYU, like having more professors or more students, people of
Just like
color around you.
somebody.
Oh.
And the thing is, like, I do believe that this lack of representation has happened intentionally to a degree.
Mm.
Because if you look at, like, for example, in film, the highest grossing films in America, they all could have happened to a black person. For example, take Star Wars. A black person totally could have been Luke Skywalker. If you take Inception,
Mm.
featuring Leonardo DiCaprio, an Afro Latino man could totally have been an architect. So there is no reason that roles such as these, that were the highest grossing films in America, could not go to people of color. And so it's exclusion to, intentionally to an extent. I feel like that is an issue that we need to work on, to
Hmm.
realize that, being black, being a person of color is normal. And but we don't see that because we don't see ourselves on TV, we don't see ourselves, in the media, we don't see ourselves in books. And so I just think representation is so much more important than people think.
Actually, kind of going off that, I did have a question that I wanted to bounce off of that. So, going off of that, how do you feel about our representation, not as people of color, but also just as queer people of color in media today? And do you have any kind of like, what would be like your idealized version? Like in a perfect world, this is what our representation would look like when it comes to our media, not in just TV, but also social media, influencers, business, all that kind.
Two quick things come to mind for me. The first is that I love TikTok a lot. And if you watch TikTok like I do, you'll see a bunch of dance trends and you'll see like Charlie D'Amelio or whatever, like dancing them and performing them. And then there's this like account that started talking about who created the trends. And I was like, wait a second, like a bunch of these people are Black people that I've never heard of them doing the dances. I've never heard their names before, but it's not associated with them because people just take it on, don't give credit, and are like, oh, it's like a white thing or whatever. And then I also think about the subtlety of it too. Like when I was growing up in the early 2000s, we had a lot of Disney shows that, you've got Hannah Montana, you've got like The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Like they're all thin, white, usually like blonde people. And so I remember growing up, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I was like, well, beautiful hair is straight, or like beautiful bodies are thin, or things like that you just internalize that you don't even realize because those are just the shows that everyone watches, right? And so there's no option for what something else could look like. And so you're always thinking like, well, that's normal. That's what I see every single day on all my favorite shows. And so I think it's really important to diversify the characters. And like you were saying, Jeannie, too, like in movies too, a bunch of the greatest, like Gossip Girl, I love it. The original one is not very diverse. Like all these TV shows that everyone's talking about and everyone's saying is the best, the best, the best. Those are the only things that we see in them.
Facts. And it's like an interesting thing because it's not like we're saying Hannah Montana's a bad actress or bad for the role, or Sweet Like a Zack or Cody is like, they're terrible humans. It's not it. It's just that in order to create, in order to have young Jeannie supported and just growing up and not internalizing these messages. I say young Jeannie, but like we all have been in this, right? I don't know, I act like I didn't grow up, like I was born 30. But yeah, it's just like representation is just so important. And it's something you don't think about if you don't, if that's not an identity you share. And so you get people that are like, it's not a big deal. And it's like, well, tell me about your experience, white man. It's like, not to be Pocahontas on you, but dang, bro, like, come on now. That's the importance of listening. People are like, what can I do? And I'm like, sometimes it's just listen. And then like you take your listening and it's not listen to like respond or to see how your struggle's worse. It's like, listen and then like try to understand where people are coming from. That goes a long way.
Yeah, in terms of like queer representation too, I think that it's so important that we have stories that aren't just about coming out, although those stories are important for people in that stage of life. Like, for example, Love, Simon, my friends and I watched it. It was super great. But also, for example, the show on Netflix, don't know if you guys have seen it, it's called Trinkets, where the main character is queer, and they totally don't make a big deal of it. They're just like, oh, my girlfriend back home. And they're like, okay, sick. Because, oh my gosh, Stacey's Face, like, you need to watch it. It's really good. Has an original song written just for the show, which is amazing. Yes, I want to see more stuff like that, because I think if we don't have a presence as queer people, people stigmatize it and they're like, oh, well, they don't exist, or if they do exist, it's weird, and like they make everything about their sexuality, And so, like, for example, even in my family, like I've had, when I first came out as bi to some of my family members, they were like, well, around the little cousins, you can't say that you're bi. You can't say that you might be interested in dating girls because we don't want them around that, And I was like, well, the thing is, if they ask me about it, I'm not going to lie to them and hide about it, because that's the whole reason I came out, was so I could finally breathe and not have to be stuck in this closet. And they were like, okay, well, even though me and your father, like, we don't go around saying, oh, well, this is how me and your uncle do it. And I was like, you don't have to, because they're like raised in heterosexuality from the time they're young kids. Like, they have these shirts, like little boys have these shirts that say chick magnets with a bunch of, little baby chicks on
Yeah.
it. And then you ask, oh, which boy do you like in class? Which girl do you like? And so, no, you don't have to explain that because it's forced on them already. And then I hear, well, it's not an excuse to impose your sexuality. That's my big thing. Existence is not imposition. Give us room to exist.
People act like being like, I'm gay. It's like, hold up. I don't want to impose that on me. It's like, I didn't ask you on a date and force you across the
Exactly.
table for me.
Usually they're not
Yeah,
even
it's
your
like,
type anyway, so that's a very big assumption on their part.
strangers be giving themselves a little bit too much credit sometimes when I'll be like,
Exactly.
yeah, sorry. And they'll be like, you're not attracted to me? It's like, very few people are. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But I think you hit it on the head. That's something. So with my parents, someone asked me the other day, they were like, coming out to my parents, like, what do I do? And my family communicates a lot very different than a lot of people, especially out here in Utah. We're very straightforward in a lot of ways. But I knew that I had to like help my parents get to a place of comfort, which is so unfair. It's such an unfair burden to carry. It's like I was the one that like struggled and like, not whatever. But if I want to have that relationship with my parents, I have to like kind of help them along because they've never experienced this before. And so what I started doing is I was like, this isn't going to be Uncle Stacy's secret. Every time I talked to my parents, I would talk about something gay, and I started kind of light, where I would be like, yeah, I'm just going on dates, and I hear like the implication, they'd be like, but I was like, that's it. And then eventually I'd be like, yo, so like, I'm like talking to this guy, he's really nice. What do you think I should do? Ask for advice, and it's like I ease them in because for them, it's not really normalized. And so to make it normalized, I had to like talk about it like it's normal. And now we're in a place where like my dad will ask about the boys going on, and my mom is like, how are the boys? Like the last guy I dated, she was like, you can call me mom. And I'm like, calm down, mom. It helped, like it just helped normalize being gay. And I think for them, especially now, in the beginning it was like, we can't say gay because children are around, and it's like, okay, we're gonna work on this. It's been really helpful.
I love that. I love that a lot because when something is so normalized, you have to kind of work with those initial reactions, I think. And so I think it makes sense that people sometimes have these visceral, like, wait, reactions. But the more that you bring it up, the more that you engage in it, the more that you are open for any identity, I think it's really helpful to normalize and like create more conversations that aren't awkward. Because if you're constantly like, I can't say that, then you're never going to get anywhere with like learning about why can I not say that, or like why can I say this, and that would be helpful.
Right. My siblings were really helpful too. My dad would talk to them and be like, why does Stacy have to? And they'd be like, look here, old man. We're like, this is super helpful.
I did want to bounce off of that to the next topic of conversation, which I wanted to bring up, which was who in your life do you find supports you, whether it be in your race, ethnicity, your sexuality, your gender identity? It's such an interesting question because it goes around everywhere, whether it be your chosen family, your friends, your real family, and biological related. My support really comes from my family and a lot of my friends because helping them, and I come out to them all the time with like different identities. First I was gay and I identified as a cis straight male, and now I identify as non-binary and polyamorous and queer, and they were my rock to bounce off of, so I feel grounded somewhere, so that if I do come out to people that I feel less comfortable going around with, I have someone to always go back to that I know will support me. So who is your guys' support system? Jeannie, if you want to start us off with that.
Awesome. Honestly, I love my best friend Tia, and Tia is here in the background just taking photos of coupons on her phone.
Hi,
So
Tia.
she does. Oh, do you want to say hi to Stacey Harkey?
Honey, 1 second.
Hi, Tia. I love you, Tia.
Tia's awesome because Tia, even though Tia is a white cis passing person in America, Tia honestly cares about struggles and listens to me continually. And is honestly never judgmental. Like if I say, like sometimes even at the Black Student Union at BYU, I feel like as a mixed person, a biracial person, sometimes I feel too white to hang out with them, but then around, you know, the kids at church, I feel too black to hang out with them. And Tia listens to all of those things and all of those identities and was actually the first person I talked to when I realized that I was bi. So like any identity I've ever had, like my best friend Tia is one of my biggest
Oh,
support systems. Yeah.
I love that. It sounds like a big part of that was her like listening. Just like listening was like helpful.
Definitely. Yeah. And just like acknowledging and not saying, oh, well, I've never seen racism, so it doesn't exist. Like, no, just like acknowledging that her experience is not necessarily my experience. So just listening and being open is so important. And then Chris also, I love them so much. Like, Chris was the first other queer Black person I ever knew, honestly, in person. So we met at Encircle, honestly, and Chris was just like very normal, and Chris was so confident and just showed me that, like, you know, I didn't have to, like, even though like we are at somewhat of a disadvantage here, we don't have to walk around like that. We can still be confident and pretend we have every advantage in the world. And so Chris and Tia, amazing.
Yes.
Mimi, how about you?
I'm a little torn. I think on the one hand, my good friends who have also been on. So I used to be religious and then started the deconstruction process, and my friends who have gone through that as well have been really, really helpful, because our whole worldview was shaped by Christianity and by like what was kind of, I mean, I guess just the whole world was like about kind of religion. So seeing us form different identities and be more comfortable with ourselves in different areas is really amazing. And then I also really love my supervisor, Tiffany. She's awesome. And I think she's just so encouraging, and my coworkers and the work environment that I have, and even the people I work with, seeing them just ask questions and step into their identities is really brave and encouraging to me.
You have some coworkers I'm just obsessed with.
They're
Alice and
amazing.
someone else that I'm just like head over heels for. Oh my gosh. I just want to invite me to a work meeting or something.
Yes, invite me to one of your parties. They look so fun.
I know. Okay. Okay. Careful what you wish for. I'm just kidding. So for me, it's probably my friends. So I at BYU, I joined the sketch comedy group. It's a LDS university. It's very everything there is very LDS ladle, you know, and it's like not the best relationship with the queer community, to put it lightly. Um, so I ended up working with most all these people at Studio C, BYU TV, as we started like growing in popularity. And right around the time we left, I came to the point where I was like ready to come out. And I like pulled my friends aside and I was like, listen, these are like my closest friends. Like I live with a couple of them, they're like my roommates. I'm like, listen, I am gonna come out and I'm gonna date, and this can be bad for business. Like, we have a very conservative Christian audience, and they might come for us just because of me. And I was like, kind of coming in to ask them questions, and they were like, someone stopped me, and they were like, stop. If they got a problem with you, we don't want them. And I was like it means a lot because our platform is like how we keep making content and how we grow, and it was like them putting me above anything financial, their livelihoods. It meant a lot, and my friends have been like that consistent support in my life as I venture on and date guys, and like my quieter, shyer friends, I'm like bring someone back and we're like hanging out, and they are like pushing themselves out of their comfort zone, making so much effort to show love and support. And they don't judge me. They just like support me where I am, even if like religiously we feel very different about things. And so mad shout out to my closest friends. And I have a great support system in my family. In my family. I was gonna say families, but I only got one. It's extensive. But and my family's great too. I feel like I have good friends, and I think the biggest thing is there's no judgment. There's no expectation. There's no you're doing this, but you know what you should be doing. Like there's none of that. It's just like as I am, they love me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But that's so awesome that all of you have such great support systems helping you out through all your life, and that as we continue to grow as people, that we can expand those support systems to a wider range and just also be other people's support systems. And actually, kind of going off of that, I wanted to ask, like, what have you experienced in, like, the differences of, like, because we all live in Utah, so, and we're all tuned into the queer community. How have you noticed the difference between being a queer person of color versus your white counterparts, and how they live differently and how they experience the world differently, or how you experience the world differently from them?
It's a good question. I have thoughts. I think one thing for me that led to my question, thinking about how like intersectionality, my Black experience has in what's what I'm looking for, informed my queer experience. I don't see a lot of my white queer friends don't really have that same, like I have been raised my whole life being told that like there will be pushback. My family is also Black and we've been in this together. And so I have like that kind of support there. And I don't see that same kind of support, especially with my queer friends that are white, who come from like religious backgrounds. It's like they don't have that same sense. And so I feel like in some ways I've been conditioned to be more like stand on my own and like, stand up against the water that's rushing against me. I can't just go with the flow my whole life because I wouldn't survive that way. You know what I mean? And so like that translates well into the queer community. And I see a lot of my white friends, and this isn't everyone. I think some people do this well, but I think there's a lot more variety and a lot more like internal struggle in places. Not that that's not the case for the Black community. I feel like our burdens are very different. And I'm not trying to say compare burdens or anything, but that's something that I feel like I notice in my friends who are all, I feel like really pretty resilient people, but don't experience that in the same way I do.
You guys are the pioneers. Okay, well, half the pioneers died on the plane. I'm not trying to be like that. So no, take what else meant. I love what Stacey said.
That's a good analogy. Y'all the pioneers. You know what? Like a Cinnabon cinnamon roll would have killed a pioneer. Like, we're trying to move from that.
I'm
We're
not
down to
trying
diarrhea. That's like a normal Friday night for me now. Oh man, that's a mess. I'm a mess.
I love it.
I love how I can relate to that too. Something I did want to ask, I don't know who brought it up, but the term ally. So when it comes to allies of the queer community, but also the POC community or the Q-BIPOC community, what do you think, or at least what do you think that the community has done well, and what do you think that they can start to do better? Because an ally can only be as great as the information as we give them. So they can help out as much as they know about, but what would be something that you would want to tell an ally that, or a non-queer person, or a non-person of color, or non-queer person of color, just like saying, like, what do you wish they would have known? Or what do you think that they could help us do better, since if we can't do it ourselves?
This one for me comes to mind because I think that it's important to acknowledge in places, even if you're not with someone of that identity, where you hold privileges. So for example, like if you walk into a doctor's office and you are a thin, non-disabled person, right? And they ask you your weight and they're like, oh, awesome, I'll give you care. I think it's important to acknowledge, even if it's just internally, like, okay, what are the problems here? First, someone is giving me care because I'm thin, and someone else wouldn't get care in the case that they weren't. So that's something. Maybe even draw attention to the doctor. Like, I'm curious why you want to take my weight and what that's going to imply about me. Or if you are able to access somewhere with stairs, like, I think it's important to call out, like, oh, I wonder why it's not accessible to other people. Whether or not it's about you personally having access to something, I think it's still important to be cognizant and advocating for more inclusive spaces. So another one too is like if you have a survey that you're doing for school or something and it says like male, female, and you could be like, hey, like I noticed there were more options. Whether or not you need the option or not, I think it's drawing awareness, especially from people who don't necessarily need the option, because it's going to be really hard for you to speak up if you're trans and be like, ooh, like where's my option? But for someone who is cisgender and can just say like, hey, like you need to be more inclusive. Like, it's not as personally hard to step in and say that, and you're advocating and you're making a difference. So
I love that. That's a really good note, insight. I want to like write that down. Ugh. One thing I think about is, and I don't know if this is going to be like a popular opinion, but this is kind of my thoughts on things. Is I know, get ready, buckle up. Black people are the worst. No, that's not what I was going to say. No, I think when it comes to allyship, right, and it's kind of maybe similar to the thought I was sharing earlier. It's that if we want, okay, if you think about like a relationship, right? If you want something to change in a relationship, being coming in guns blazing may not be the best way to get that message across, right? So like if I'm going to talk to my roommate or my boyfriend, and I'm actually single right now, so just putting that out into the sphere. No, if I was going to talk to my boyfriend and I was like, listen here, you, I don't know, whatever I call him, and I come in just swinging, that may not be as effective as me being like, hey, let's chat. You know, I know you may not be meaning offense by this thing, but I don't like when you do this thing. And I think about that in our relationships in our communities. So, like if I want someone to actively become different, I might have to be more tactful in the way I approach them. And that doesn't mean sacrificing the message. That just means being aware of like where they're coming from. Like it's one thing if someone's coming at you with a knife versus they bump into you on accident, right? It's like a very different intentionality behind that. But I think that's something that can be better done by allies. Because for me, there's a lot of pain behind my experiences. And you might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and I won't feel sorry for you. So if you say some silly stuff to me and I come at you with vigor and vim, then that sounds like, you know what I mean? It's like, my bad. There's like complexity. But our allies were in these spaces that may not be as painful for them. I would love for them to have, to be, it's okay to be like patient with people and to be strategic in how you communicate. Like when talking to your family, like I hate to say with love because I feel like that's so cliche, but like with understanding can do a lot. And it's going to be, might be a little long suffering, but being an ally, you can take that burden on in a less painful way. Does that make sense?
yeah, 100%. If I'm hearing correctly, I think it's kind of like with family members, there's this narrative on one hand that you need to be authentic, you need to say what you need and what you believe, and like you need to scream it out loud. You shouldn't be a bad for being angry. And there's so much truth to that. Like you shouldn't be shamed for being angry about something. Obviously, you've been dealing with it for a long time and the repercussions. And there is some truth to like you shouldn't minimize yourself or your struggles. On the other hand, people don't really learn from yelling, being attacked, feeling like they're doing something wrong and are being told they're a bad person, right? So I see that a lot in therapy where I might have an idea of what would be really helpful for someone. Like I might think to them, if you are restricting your diet, like I think you should stop all your calorie apps. I think you should eat intuitively. I think you should do XYZ, right? But we can't get through that in one session. It's not going to just be like a quick shift. It has to be like, wow, why do you diet? Like, I'm curious about what that wound looks like for you. Or like, man, that makes sense that like you've been taught one thing your whole life. And you just have to start really slowly sometimes because that's the way people understand things. People feel connected and heard. And you can be mad at the fact that like it's not really fair that someone has to over explain and to be overly patient with someone. And at the same time, understand that when people are inundated with messages for so long, it takes a long time to shift them. And if you really want lasting change, you really have to go about it in a thoughtful perspective.
And I say that, and you said it so much better than me. And I say that with a grain of salt because the last thing I want is for people to be like, I can't be mad. And it's like, no, no. I think anger, I think frustration is a beautiful motivator to get change done. I remember this experience where I was sitting on a plane with my friends. We were doing this like work trip and we were watching this movie together and my buddy he was laughing. He was hitting his tray table, having a good time, rocking back and forth. And after like 30 minutes into this like movie we were watching, the lady who's in the chair in front of him turns around and she's like, stop it. She was like it felt like 0 to 60, right? But what I thought about in her position, she was getting her chair rocked by my friend. And it took her being angry to have the like motivation to say something. And I was like, thank goodness she was able to say something, because that anger motivated her and helped her like have the like the gumption to say it. And I was like, I don't think anger's bad. It can help us communicate when we feel like we're getting pushed to a brink. Ideally, we can feel safe to communicate before that. But I was like still thankful that she communicated. So I was like, I don't want to bash anger. I'm not saying anger is bad. Let that motivate you to have like to get that positive change or to establish your boundaries or whatnot, you know?
I will say that one of my favorite quotes from the civil rights movement was said by MLK, and I agree that this might not be exact, but it was that riots are the language of the unheard, which was basically just saying that anger can sometimes be validated. If you've been ignored for so long, or communities have been ignored for so long, that when they see you angry, they finally take it seriously. And that's, of course, not to advocate to say that, like, violence is always the answer. But when it gets to the point that is so bad that communities and marginalized groups come out with forceful aggression, that it's obviously time to make a change.
You might feel like it's 0 to 60, but that has been building for
Oh,
a
yeah,
while.
for sure.
I'm just like I like that. I don't think anger's bad. I'm always like, feel your feels. Like, you know what? Think about times when someone has crossed a line with you, and communicating, hey, that hurt, is very different than like, that hurt. Like, that makes an impact and can establish a stronger boundary. You know what I mean?
I think something that comes up for me that I think, Jean, that's really important conversation is that line between like signaling and, gosh, what's the word that people use for, like, when you're like looking like an ally and you're doing all the things, but you're not actually like
Like
doing
virtue
them.
signaling.
Virtually signaling. Yes, yes, yes. And then, but it's hard because for some people, it's like, well, if I'm doing all the right things, then I don't need to say anything. But then no one really knows that you can be a safe space. And so that can be hard. But if you are just doing like, I remember the Blackout Tuesday or whatever, was it like 2 years ago? Like it's hard because it's like, that's just something that everyone's doing. It doesn't mean anything. But then at the same time, it shows that you like care about something. So like, I don't know. It's almost like with pronouns too. Like if you share your pronouns, sometimes people are like, oh, that's like, I know that you get it. I know that you care. But then if you do, you're also like, nah, like, are you just being performative type of thing? So there's just, I'm very curious about that finding the balance between those.
Yeah. Coming from a position where I had to change my pronouns pretty recently, it was within the past 4 months, and explaining it to my friends, I recently started to find out who were some actual allies. Because when I told people what my pronouns were, and these are people that I knew for a long time about my new pronouns, they either said, okay, I can respect that, and then they would show an effort to keep trying to correct themselves whenever they would misgender me and use my wrong pronouns, that they consistently tried to correct themselves, and they're getting it more and more consistent now, which shows me that they are trying, versus the friends that I did have that said that, okay, I can somewhat get on board with that, and they just continuously just like misgendered me and said, like, didn't correct themselves. I had to correct them, and they said, oh, sorry about that, and then just moved on. So it just really does show, like, okay, so you're more tolerant about the person that I am, other than like you are accepting.
Like, it didn't feel like they cared.
Yeah,
Interesting. And you know what? That's like interesting because it's like chances are, I mean, they could have cared, but it wasn't expressed. You know what I mean? It's like, how are you supposed to know that? You
for
know?
sure.
I think you need to
Interesting.
look
There
the part
is,
and act the part.
yeah, I do think like one of the, I dated this guy and he said this thing to me that I thought has always stuck with me where he's like, his journey, it took his family like years to get to a good place with him and to be like a good place where he was good with them. And he told me like, it took me decades to grapple with my sexuality. I can't expect my family to get it immediately. And I was like, dang, that's some very patient stuff that I don't think our families deserve all the time. But I think about that with allies too, where it's like allyship is also a process and people are like learn and grow. They start out maybe more tolerant, which is not the ideal. but it's better than like being, direct opposition. But it's like there, I think people are also on this journey of allyship sometimes, and it's okay to recognize that and say, you know what, you're moving in the right direction. Here's a way that maybe you can improve your allyship, coming from someone who is queer or black or the community you're trying to be an ally to. But I think it's cool to be like, yeah, it's okay to, you're not going to be a perfect ally, and we can work on that. The goal is growth.
Yeah. Because we all grew up in the same oppressive systems. And so even when we've been grappling with that work our whole lives, like some people haven't had to because it didn't affect them.
Hmm.
And so I like, Chris, that you said, like, you can tell when your friends are trying and when they're getting better because the
Hmm.
more you practice and the more you are intentional, the better it gets. And like, like you said, Stacey, too, like it's really nice when they're not just like, boom, like this terrible thing. And you're like, oh my gosh, like that's the worst thing you can say. And in that way, I think that the process of like, sometimes people will say like you need to understand deeply why you're not doing something or why you're not saying something, and I fully think that's important. I think it starts with the behavioral change first, though. So like even if you don't understand someone's pronouns fully yet, you still need to use the correct ones, and as you learn more, like it'll become more secondhand nature.
For sure.
Hmm.
To help us close off, because we are getting to that time, I wanted to ask. I know I want to keep the conversation going because I love talking to you guys so much. But kind of going off with that, with what you've experienced so far in your life, how do you feel like you've grown as a person, whether it be about your race, ethnicity, and or sexuality and gender? Have you seen like, how do you think you're still on that journey when it comes to certain aspects of that identity? Or do you feel like you've kind of completed a whole road and like you think you're pretty secure? And just kind of like ending with that, I'd love to know your guys' thoughts.
And right now, I guess learning and growing, I'm trying to work on like understanding that defending that fullness of joy and who I am is a worthwhile thing, because a lot of times when you get persecution, when you get homophobia and racism, it's really easy to say maybe my identity is not worth it, maybe just like if I pretended to be straight or repress this part of me, my life would be easier. And so I think it's just like learning and understanding myself that our identities and our fullness of joy is worth fighting for.
Well
That was
said.
beautiful, Jeannie. I love
Yeah.
that.
I'll jump in with I think one of my biggest things, and something I've like coming to terms with, is that you're most like when it comes to being like effective and making change, one of the best things you can do is merely just be authentic. And that sounds easier said than done, right? And I think of authenticity as this two-step process of taking the time inwardly to learn about who you are. That takes time. That takes effort. You don't just like know. You're like like learning who you are, what you like, your preferences, who you are as a person, and then the outward expression of that information. So the inward process of learning who you are and then living it in a way that's like creates congruence. And I think authenticity is, and that's been like, to answer your question, kind of been my journey, is how to be more authentic and how to be more myself and to live that way outwardly. So like, for example, like Jeannie was talking about earlier, like I didn't have this platform where I was like, I'm gonna force the world to see how gay I am. I was just like, I'm gonna exist as I am with no pretense and no fear of people being like, you posted a picture, stop shoving it down my throat or whatever. It's like I'm not, that's, you be posted like whatever, I'm not worried about that. And like it's been cool to hear that me merely being myself, that work I'm taking to like be more myself and authentic has been helpful and like
Amen.
helps other people.
That is
I love that.
awesome.
I had just been reminded of something I wrote in my notes, which I was looking for. But if y'all know Glennon, she's my favorite person ever. Um, so if you're listening, Glennon, it's me. Anyways,
It's me, Mimi. I want that to be my ringtone. It's me, Mimi. It's like in tears almost.
we can be friends, I promise. And she said something on her podcast, and it says Some of the people who have found the most easy belonging in groups would have the least need for deep self-exploration, and the people who have felt like misfits in most of these places, faith, gender, sexuality, even mental health. How much I learn in all of those areas because I felt a little like a misfit in all of those places. And to people who felt comfortable in all those places, there's exciting new work to do that maybe was robbed from you by feeling easy belonging. And I was like, whoa, that's like, there's so much beautiful work that gets done through understanding yourself better and your identities, and it's so hard. And at the same time, there's something really beautiful about doing it, being in therapy, getting these deeper kind of understandings of the world, getting to know other people that you wouldn't otherwise. And I just really appreciate how you can really connect with people with marginalized identities. I don't know, it's just there's like a really beautiful depth to that. So
Yes, what a great quote. So good.
Hashtag it's me, Mimi.
It's me, Mimi.
I feel like that's gonna be a audio clip from this.
I Hey, whoever's listening to this, I please, if you just like have it in your soul to like take that little clip and send it to me, I would really appreciate it. I think I'm playing about my ringtone.
And send it to Glennon. So
We will be reaching out to them. But closing it off, for me, I kind of want to, I'm still growing, and I still want to expand my knowledge both in my sexuality and gender, and also along with my heritage, because I am Latinx. I do want to be more in tune with my culture than I am right now, and I kind of want to start with that, like learning more Spanish, because both of my parents are fluent, and I want to be better at that so I can communicate with my extended family a lot more. And as far as gender and sexuality goes, I mean, it's always a journey. You never stop changing as a person, and that goes for your gender and your sexuality. But closing off with that, I want to say thank you guys so much for coming, and it's been such a pleasure talking to all of you. So I hope the listeners had a great time listening to us ramble on and talk. But I just wanted to say, and I love you guys, and I hope you guys live a great life, and we all feel better and more supported for it.
Oh, so fun.